I'm going to try and share some about setting up the audio system for CENTRI-KID. If you've never done it before, it's probably a little overwhelming. Hopefully this will help alleviate some of that. Probably the first thing I would do if you've never seen this gear before and you've never set up a PA, I would the first thing I would tell people to do is you'll find your cases that have the green audio tag written on them, which is what you're looking at right now. There should be several of them. There's lots of stuff in those cases, and if you're not familiar with them, I would definitely try to dump everything out of the case and get it into like piles. So when I say like piles, that means cables that are the same. So I've got right here I've got a pile of electrical, which is extension or power. I've also got a pile of XLR here. This XLR, this is 3-pin. Sometimes people call it mic cable. You'll need to have this to connect your microphones and instruments and DIs and all that. But you'll also need it to set up the audio system from the amplifiers to the front of house audio console. And then I've also got this pile, which is a speak-on. This is connecting our amplifiers to our speakers themselves. And you'll have other stuff in these cases. You'll have mic stands and some power quad boxes and things like that. But I would definitely try and get familiar with the gear you have, especially the first time you set it up. It will be probably the easiest way to do it is just to dump everything on the floor, get things in like piles, and find out what you have, and then continue with the setup process. We'll continue on from here, but I just wanted to establish that first, just to get familiar with the gear and know what you have. Okay, so we've talked some already about separating gear and finding out what we have. Now we're to the point where we can place our equipment. For this example, it's going to be a little smaller scale than what you'll be looking at when you get to your venue. But just for example's sake, we'll use this as an option. So this is my mixing console and my digital snake racks. There's 2 of those in the front of house rack. This is called front of house. That's where my mixer and my snake will end, and this is where control happens and where you mix and all that. So this is, for this example video, this is our front of house area, and you will have a rack that looks just like the one that you're looking at right now. This is the mixing console you'll have. There's 24 channels on the mixer, and the snake actually can handle up to 32 channels, but you won't use all of those naturally because you only have 24 channels on the console. This is our front of house, and then up here is where for this example, is our stage area. We have 2 more of the snake racks, and I like to think of them in banks of 16 channels as opposed to 32 altogether. That way it's a little easier to get your head around what is where, and as far as routing, especially on stage, I think the separated 16 channel banks is kind of a nice thing to have, just to keep things logical. We have a speaker stack in the middle. Of course, this won't be exactly in the middle of where you go, but just for the example, that's where our speakers are. Then we also have an amp rack, which is the smaller short rack with wheels on the bottom there. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but I just wanted to kind of give you a rough layout. I'll also provide a diagram as well, just to kind of lay it out in a broader scale. But this is roughly what you'll have for an audio system. You'll have 2. There's a stack of 4 speakers, but you'll have 2 per side. So 2 will be on the right-hand side of the room, and 2 will be on the left-hand side, facing the audience, of course. And then you'll also have subs. I don't have subs out just due to space, but the logic behind subs is exactly the same as wiring up the speakers, the main speakers. So it's not that different. I'll show you how to do it with amplifiers and connections, but as long as you understand that basic concept of cabling from the amplifier to the speaker, it should be no problem. So let's move on to, I'll show you some cabling and things like that at the front of house, and then I'll show you where everything terminates at the stage area for the initial cable runs. Okay, so we'll start at the back of the console. This is where our connections from the stage will come to. This is also where we're going to send signals to our amplifiers. You have 24 channels here. The first stuff I usually connect is my main outputs. That's left and right here. You can see inside they should be labeled. It's a little hard to tell, but so the main output is right there, and it says right above it, and then there's another one that is main output left right there. For this example, I'm running just some audio from a phone here and here. This is an RCA cable, but this basically represents audio coming from your computer that you'll be using a lot in-house. I'm not sending anything from the mono output. I'm just running stereo left and right. The level currently is on 0 there's a small gain knob right here. I usually leave that on 0 all the way over just to give me the most output from the console. Over here I have, right now I just have 8 channels connected, but you'll have two of these snakes that have at least 2, maybe 3, I believe, to do full 24 channels. But these are sub snakes. This just lets the cabling from the console to the digital snake, makes it a little easier and cleaner. And these are just labeled 1 through 8, and then you'll have another set that's 9 through 16, and then 17 through 24 will complete your 24 channels. You probably won't use all those channels, but the patch snakes come in 8 channel blocks. And then we'll just move from there. Here's the back of the console over to here inside of the rack. It might be a little dark in there, but that's where everything is going to. So from the console, you're just plugging from the inputs there to the line outputs here, and these are all color coded, so they should be exactly the same as what's over there. And then this is where your stereo feed from the console is going to go into. It's essentially outputs and inputs, so the send to the amplifiers is an output. These channels up here are technically inputs. We're starting up front just because most people who've never done it would start, up front. So just from a logic standpoint, that's where I would just kind of begin if you've never done any of this. So I'd start here and connect all the stuff from the console first, and then we can go to the digital snake connections and making sure everything is correct there. But that's just a brief overview of the front of house, and now we'll move on to the amplifier rack. Okay, so this is our amplifier rack. At the top of this rack, we have it's called a Driverack. It does a lot of things, but usually what we use it the most for is a digital crossover. What that means is we're taking a stereo signal from our console and we're splitting it to highs and lows. This little piece of gear allows us to split that signal and then send it to our amplifiers, which we have down here. The amplifier configuration is pretty straightforward. Usually I have amps 1 and 2 as my left and right drivers for the main speakers. So this is a high amplifier and this is a high amplifier. And then the 2 on the bottom I designate for my subwoofers. We don't have those out today, but the idea is basically the same. when it comes to amplifier runs. So this is high, these two on the bottom are low. The crowns with the digital display, for high amplifiers, I always have DSP off. That means digital signal processing. We're not processing anything inside the amplifier. All it is a driver to push the signal to our speakers. We let the Driverack do all the processing, okay? And that's what this gear is for. So we just let the amplifier be an amplifier. And the same is true for the subs, except the subs are what's called a bridge. We're basically using only one channel on the subs, which would be channel 1. So this knob won't really do anything if this amp is in a bridge mode. And the same is true here. This knob isn't necessary. So the only knob we're going to be using to drive subs would be the amp 1 and channel 1 on both of those. And now let's go to the back, and I can show you physical connections on the back of the amps. One other item on the Driverack that I wanted to let you guys know about, actually a couple. The first thing is which setting you need to be on for your Driverack to work correctly for you. Typically, I'm on this number 3 channel. If you go over here to the recall button, it gives you a big list of different recall presets. And for the configuration we're going to use for everything we do at camp, I usually leave it on channel 3, which is the 3 preset. So if you were going to change it, you would go back over here and push recall, and then it'll configure, and we'll bring up the number 3 configuration. This is a stereo system, so we're stereo 2-way, which means highs go up here and lows go down here. We do not have a mid-range channel. We're just using everything everything high left and right, low left and right to our subs, and there is no mid-range in this configuration. There is, but we're not routing it to 3 different amplifiers. We're just using 2 sets of amps. And also, one other note: when you turn this unit on, lows are going to be low, mids, and highs are all going to have a red light on the front of them. That means the signal is being muted to the amplifiers. So whenever you're ready to actually send audio through the PA and you want to hear something, just be sure to turn those off, and that way the signal will actually go into the unit and will go to the speakers. For now, we'll leave them muted. Because that's the way it needs to be. Just when you're cabling and stuff, you don't want to have a live signal going to your amplifiers until you're done and you're ready to actually try and hear something. So that's the settings on the Driverack. Okay, so settings. We're still on the physical connections. We've done the physical connections up front at our front of house, and we're sending the output of the console into the snake, and we're sending it. Those were connected into the bottom rack snake. I'll cover that more when we cover the digital snake, but just for now, that's good to remember. And now this is one of our snake heads at the stage area. I'm coming off usually 15 and 16. Those are usually at the end of the block. That way it leaves all your 1 through 14 open for whatever you're going to send. So mics from stage and all that can come on the front end. So my mic cable is coming out of here, and then it's sending over here to our Driverack. You can see in there the Driverack is the inputs have green tape on the top of this one. Yours might not have that, but just for the video, that's easier to see. So left and right are coming out of our snake, then into the Driverack, left and right, on the right-hand side of the unit. On the other side, we have our, this is our highs, and this output is coming out high to our amplifiers. Currently, we don't have anything coming from the lows because we don't have subs. But when you do have subs, you'll run 2 lines, 1 to each of your amplifiers down here. So left and right out of the highs, and these are going, the left-hand channel from this unit is going to this amplifier, the one on top. I usually consider that my left amplifier, and that goes to the channel 1 input. And then the right channel up here on the drive rack, that's the purple cable, that's coming down into the second amplifier's channel 1 input. And then speaker connections are pretty straightforward. This is called speak-on cable. It's blue at the end, and this cable will go to my speakers, which they're tough to see, but they're right there. And so those are just going in to the channel input. Sometimes when you've split your speakers, you'll have 2 per side, so you'll run the left channel into your first speaker and then have a short jumper cable that will come out of this speaker and then drop down to this. It's from the through, but that just sends it through the signal through this speaker, and it can go to another speaker on right below it. And then you would do the same for the right-hand side speakers. They're exactly the same as far as cabling and configuration. Again, our 2 speakers on the bottom, those are designated for subs. The same connection path is used. We just go out of the lows. The low section of the drive rack, which is here and here, you can just send the left out to the bottom, and that would be right here. Excuse me, those are speak-on connections. This is a different amplifier type, but your input 1 would be there, input 1 on the bottom, and then speak-on connections would be here. But for the most part, everybody will have this Crown XTI type amplifier, so the connections, the layout should be the same on all your amps. Okay, now we're going to talk some about the digital snake and setting that up. I'm going to include a diagram as well for you, so it's easier to reference. But the basic concept, it's a little confusing on the backside of these units. I think when they were built and engineered, I don't think they built them super well for folks who've never used audio system gear. So hopefully we can explain a little bit on this and make things easier. So on the front panel of the 2 on the front, at the front of house system, you see each unit has 16 channels, 1 through 16. So usually I like to consider my top unit as channels 1 through 16 on the console, and then the bottom unit will be 17 through 32. Again, your console only has 24 channels, so you won't use all of them. But that's kind of how I designate things. Each channel has its own gain knob. It has a 48-volt phantom power. It has pads and stuff like that, which we'll get into more at training to help you understand what those are for. But for right now, let's just focus on physical connections and addressing. So think of the unit as it's able to send 16 channels and receive 16 channels of audio. So the sending is usually mainly based at the stage, because you're sending signal from microphones and guitar amplifiers and DIs and things like that to get to the audio console. The audio console will send some stuff. It will send the monitor mix for your band members. It also sends to our amplifiers, like we covered in the amplifier setup previously. So these units are basically just inputs and outputs sent over Cat5 cable, which is Ethernet cable. So to make sure this works correctly, you have to address the transmit bank and receive bank of each unit so they can talk to each other in harmony. So usually you can use any of the numbers you would like to for this. I mean, it's just as logical to use 1, 2, 3, 4 for this, but it goes up to 16 different transmit and receive banks. So you could arrange your transmit and receive however you'd like, but just for sake of simplicity, we'll use this scheme. So my first block is 1, 2. So I'm transmitting on 1, I'm receiving on 2, and then my bottom block is transmitting on 3, receiving on 4. For some folks who've used this unit before, in the past we've used a snake option and a 96 kilohertz option. For the sake of this setup, I'm not using either of those. So those, they have lights right beside them. Those lights are off, and the lights here are off when it comes to snake and 96 kilohertz. We're not going to be using that at all in these setups. So you can, if they're on when you get the units, you can use a little, I use this little piece of, it's just a flathead screwdriver, but it's small, just to get in there, and it helps me change channels, but it can also, on the back, you can turn off the snake and 96 kilohertz options there. So 1 and 2 is here, and then let's go to the other side at the stage. Is I have the same 16 channel block. This will be separate in its own little rack unit. Again, same channel layout. Transmit bank on this one is 2, receive bank is 1. So those are exactly opposite of the previous rack that we just saw at the front of house. This allows this unit to send signal to the top rack and receive signal from the top rack via this this yellow Ethernet cable. Your cables will be black, so this is just purely for the video, but that's basically how we're running it. I'm only running 1 Ethernet cable. I'm not running 2. In the past, we've run double runs of cable. That's not necessary in this configuration. So 2 and 1 is what we've set up here, and then on the other side for my other 16 channels is 3 and 4, or excuse me, 4 on transmit, 3 is receive. If you note on the back of this unit, this is where my stereo line to my amplifiers is. It's on channels 15 and 16 of the secondary rack. So from a channel count standpoint, it's coming off of bottom rack 15, 16 at the front of house, and then coming out from 15, 16 on the receive. And then it's going to my amplifiers. Okay, so cabling for the digital snake purely from a connection standpoint. This has been confusing for some in the past as well, so we'll try and get as simple as possible. At my front of house, the yellow feed is this is coming. Everything is going into the loop of these 2 units. We're not using there's an option that says snake on all these units. We're not using the snake option at all. Okay. So that's why I told you previously to turn off the snake enable button, because we're not using the snake option here. Only thing we're using is the loop. So loop on top, the top unit, this green cable is coming from the in to the out on the bottom unit, and then my in unit, or excuse me, my in has the yellow feed cable. This yellow feed cable is for the video only, but it represents our one and only feed to go to our amplifier rack, to our stage box, which is our channels 1 through 16. Okay, so let's go to the back there. And again, this is the back of my stage box, channels 1 through 16. My yellow cable this is from the out of the loop, and so out is going to my input loop on the bottom stage rack, And then my blue, this other blue connection, this is going to the loop output on my stage box up here. And this is my secondary stage box. So to cover it again, output of the secondary stage box is going to the input loop on the primary stage box, and then the output of the primary, and this is all from loop, is going to my front of house, and that's on the bottom rack. So if this says out on the loop, it's going to the input of the loop on the bottom rack, and then we're looping from the bottom to the top. Ins and outs technically don't make any difference. You could swap them and it should work exactly the same. It was just an easier way to let people know this is plugging in to the first unit and plugging into the secondary unit and looping. It's a little confusing, but the signal chain is always going to work the same. So that's the simple cabling on the Snake. Again, we're not using the Snake enable option. We're not using the Snake unit option. We're just doing this all through the loop, so you only have to run one long Ethernet cable. Okay, so back at front of house, we've made all of our physical connections. I'm sending signal to the console. We can see the green meter moving there. I have a phone up there that's sending some audio. Usually that's what I do first, is just try to pass some type of signal through the PA once I get everything physically connected, and trying to make sure that audio does in fact go through the system and it sounds sort of decent. You can tweak things later. At this point it's really just let's get the PA up and connected and everything on and get some kind of audio through it to make sure that everything is functional. And then you can go back and set up microphones and get your instruments done and things like that. But so if my main is down, my signal goes away, my audio is being pushed up. This is about 0. Your unity gain, that's where I want everything. You can see it in the console. That's good. You can see it on our 15 and 16 on the bottom rack. That's the signal that's being passed to the amplifier rack and the drive rack. So if you see those two there moving up and down, that's good, because that means the console is sending to the Snake, and it should be sending up the Ethernet cable. But for some reason we don't have audio currently, and I believe that's because our mutes are on on the drive rack. Remember I talked earlier about setting up the mutes or turning them off, because if they're on, then you will not have signal through the PA because they're being muted at the drive rack. So let me go turn the signal down at the mixer. So the signal's down now, and let's go unmute our channels up here at the drive rack. Again, we don't have any lows for this example, but the highs is what we would need. There is no mid, so of course there's no option there. But okay, so all our mutes are off, and we're back to the console. And there's our audio. And again, this is just highs right now, but that's what we're looking for. And if you wanted, right now my outputs on the gains for the outputs of the system are all the way off. I'm still passing signal through it, but if you needed more of a boost, you can add more. And then you can get higher if you needed to. It really just depends on your venue. But for now, since we're in such a small area, we're just going to leave them at 0. Normally, when I'm using the digital Snake, especially at stage, if you need more boost on a specific input, you can add from the gain knob, especially at the stage boxes, because normally I kind of set them at this 9 o'clock position just to give you a baseline, and then you can adjust from there later if it's too hot or too quiet. But that's where I would just kind of start them, and then you can go on from there. Okay, one final thing on physical connection. We're gonna physically connect our aux feeds. This is for your musicians to hear themselves on stage. This is called a monitor mix. So it's the same concept as what we did for the Driverack and the amplifiers. It's just coming from a different output. So on this console, there's an aux output section. It has 10 outputs. And so if you have 4 or 5 musicians, you'll use auxes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or however many people you need to send feeds to. So we're using a 1/4 inch to XLR cable. So we're coming off of aux 1 here, and then we're coming over. In this scenario, I'm using channel 1 of the top box. And this is the other end of the cable. It's just a 3-pin, like a mic cable. So that's going to the line input on the top rack. Then I'm going to come over to my front of house, my stage box, our primary box, which is addressed to receive from the top rack. And then we would plug a standard mic cable to the output, the line output, of this unit, channel 1, and that would feed to the musician's body pack, and that has a mic input on the bottom of it, and then they can plug their earbuds into it, and then they can hear themselves from a monitor mix, which is provided by the console. So that's basically the physical connections that we needed to cover as far as the snake and the amplifiers and the monitor feed. So we'll cover more of this at specific times in training, but I just wanted to give you some type of reference for all this gear, so you could go back to and look at it if you needed to, just from a video perspective. That might make it a little easier to figure out what you need to do to get the PA up and running.